Project Sapient is a podcast meant to engage our brothers and sisters in the law enforcement and military communities in conversations that we all know we need to have. All opinions you hear are our own, and they are protected by the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. They are in no way reflect or are meant to reflect the opinion of any specific agency, officer, or service member. Some opinions may be controversial. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy. Welcome back, Project Sapient, post-Thanksgiving. Hopefully everyone had a great Thanksgiving, got your stomachs filled with everything. In the world of first responders, law enforcement, we were very busy over the Thanksgiving holiday. I always say it's a nightmare of a day for us because it's just, again, you don't see your family or a family member that is so far removed comes back into the picture, and all of a sudden you've got issues. So it's gets to be an interesting time. But anyways, so we actually got a great guest today, and I was so fortunate to have get connect with them through my friends over at Havoc Journal. And you guys all know I write a lot for Havoc Journal, being the number one writer for Havoc Journal with over 100 articles on there from everything law enforcement, military, what have you. And, definitely go on their website at havocjournal.com. You can read all kinds of issues from politics, geopolitics, world politics, to military, to veteran affairs, to first responder affairs, all and everything in between. They have it all. So head over to Havoc Journal, again, havocjournal.com. Head over there and definitely go read a lot of their stuff. Give them a like and a share. And also 22 Mohawks. You guys know I am deeply involved with them. 22 Mohawks for first responders and veteran suicide awareness, where we give service or emotional support dogs to veterans and first responders. And it's been an amazing organization to work with and help out. I think I've already made the announcement last episode. We are now in an official partnership with X-35 Airborne School, where the birth of the Airborne Retreat was born in 2021, shortly after the fall of Afghanistan. And it was it's one of those things where whiskey and bad decisions, it turned out to be a good decision, where we ended up putting together this kick-ass airborne retreat for veterans, and we go and jump out of planes for a week. And it's a great time, great group down there. You guys all know Graham Jones, who runs that whole show down there. Great guy with his entire team. So I'll put in the show notes again where the lottery's open, and put your name in, put your friend's name in, put someone that that they don't want to jump out of a plane, but we'll jump them out of a plane anyways. It doesn't matter. It's a great time and great networking and connection. And obviously, AAA Police Supply, huge supporters and sponsors with us. That's aaapolicisupply.com. Head over there. Use the code SAPIENT2025 for 10% off your entire order. Anything law enforcement related, from belts to battle belts to vests to uniforms, you name it, they have it. And that is aaapolicisupply.com, and use the code SAPIENT2025. So let's circle back to who I have on here and who I connected with from my friends over at Havoc Journal. It was actually an article that he wrote, which we'll get into in a little bit, that I really enjoyed. And I'll give you guys a quick bio on who he is. That way I keep you guys from guessing. John Teichert. John, am I saying your last name right?
It's Teichert, but as long as you don't call me T-shirt, I'm okay.
Teichert, John Teichert, and his bio, we'll get right into it. After graduating from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Stanford University, John entered the United States Air Force as an F-15E, as an Echo combat pilot. He would go to serve as a F-22 test pilot. I got lots of questions about that, being a test pilot, and eventually lead as the commander of Joint Base Andrews, commander of Edwards Air Force Base, and our nation's senior defense official in Iraq. General Teichert ended his service in the Air Force as Assistant Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force International Affairs. During his career, he logged over 2,000 flight hours in 38 different aircraft types. That is a lot of flying, General.
It is. I enjoyed every bit of it.
Oh, well, they'll start to see that as we talk about it. And General is a champion for inspirational, innovative, integrity-filled leadership. He has vast whole of government leadership experience, from cutting-edge technology to our nation's most sensitive international relationships. John has written and spoken extensively on leadership, innovation, national security, international affairs, and resilience. He is he's an Amazon #1 best-selling author and former candidate for U.S. Senate who maintains a robust schedule of international-level media engagements. John is the founder and president of Capital Leadership, LLC, developing the leaders our nation needs and fostering a leadership style that breaks barriers, challenges convention, and ignites innovation. His wide-ranging activities can be best followed through johnteichert.com and LinkedIn, as he continues to serve with his amazing wife, Melanie, and their three remarkable children. And General, again, it's an honor to have you on here for what we do on this podcast, especially when we come around talking about resilience. This year's theme has been really around mindset and resilience, because I felt that it needs to be talked about in the first responder world and in the military world, because we've gone through a lot of things. 20 years of GWAT has really taught us a lot about resilience. And again, honored to have you on here, sir.
I am so honored to join you, and I especially appreciate the audience of my heroes, military and first responders, and all that they continue to do for our communities and our country. And I love being a part of a discussion like this. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And General, your book just goes right into it. The thing I like is that, boom. I'm like, whoa, that's the title of the book. It just it just hits you right in the face, so to speak. I mean, what got you to kind of title it that way?
I actually crowdsourced the title. My envisioning of the title was innovation on afterburner. I'm a fighter pilot. Afterburner is that chunk of the engine at the back that dumps in raw fuel and kicks out a whole lot of thrust. But as I started to talk to people, I realized that people outside the aviation community might not know what afterburner is. So on LinkedIn and on Facebook and on Twitter, I sent out some ideas about what my book is about. And people came back with title ideas. Yeah. And then I culled that down to my top 4 or 5 and then had people vote on it. Yep. It wouldn't have been what I would have chosen, but it's far better than my ideas. And I'm so glad that I reached out and let people decide that it was going to be Boom as the primary title, with that awesome F-22 headed towards you on the cover. Yeah. And then the subtitle, which is Leadership That Breaks Barriers, Challenges Convention, and Ignites Innovation. I mean, it really captures that essence, in terms of just that book. I mean, I wrote I actually Havoc Journal and Second Mission Foundation, that retired Colonel Charlie Faint, he owns and runs, and they help veterans write books, publish books. So my book, it was almost a similar aspect where I'm like, all right, what should I title this? Because it all, and sent a poll out and similar type thing. People came back with The Resolute Path. I'm like, let's do it. All right, that's what I like that idea, and people are very creative in our circles, and it was really cool. But they say that people don't judge a book by its cover, but they do. Oh yeah, both by the design on the cover and the title. And so I'm glad that you got it right, and I'm glad by listening to people I got it right.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little about your military career, especially talking about being an F-22 test pilot. And curious on just kind of your personal experience in the F-22, because I'm sure that, we have civilian listeners, and I'm sure they would love to know, because F-22 is one of those premier, obviously one of the most lethal cutting edge jet out there. If you want to go into just talking a little bit about it.
Yeah, I was so blessed. I started off my military career as a combat pilot in the F-15E Strike Eagle, but I had always wanted to be a test pilot. and eventually applied to test pilot school. It's a year-long school in the Mojave Desert at Edwards Air Force Base. You fly dozens of different types of aircraft, and you learn how to be a test pilot. And I just happened to have the great opportunity right out of test pilot school to be the first student right out of TPS to go fly the Raptor at an early stage of its development. And as I strapped into that amazing machine, I realized that it is truly the most incredible aviation machine ever built. I tell people that you can pick the 3 best pilots you know and let them pick their choice of plane against a new guy or gal in an F-22, and it's no contest 1v3. And partly that's because of weapons, partly that's because of integrated avionics, partly that's because of super cruise and stealth, but it is a phenomenal machine. And when people go to air shows and they watch, say, the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds, and then the F-22 demo is there, that single demo of an F-22 blows away those fancy demo programs because it does things that planes shouldn't be able to do. And I pinch myself every time I think about 3 different assignments in my career where I was able to fly that mighty F-22 Raptor.
Oh, that's awesome. Actually, it's funny, before we got on, I was watching this F-22 pilot explaining that an F-22 can go as slow as a Cessna and goes like as fast as, I forget exactly what he compared it to. But to me, that's amazing where you have such 2 different levels in a fighter jet where it can go as slow as a turtle and still maintain its flight and its ability to do what it needs to do and go as fast as possible to get to an objective.
Sometimes when you're in those dogfights, 1v1 or 1v many, you've got to be able to slow down and maintain maneuverability. And so flying as slow as a Cessna while still maintaining complete nose control of that aircraft is important in those scenarios. But we like to kill the bad guys from miles and miles away where they die relaxed because they don't even know that we're there. But just in case they get close, we're able to maneuver with the best of them.
Oh, I'm sure it's a surprise when you can move that slow and that well, in that plane. But no, thank you for giving us a little quick glimpse of what it's like being the test pilot of a F-22. I actually did not know that it's a year-long process. See, I learned something every episode I do. I always learn, which that's why I love, this community where there's always something new to learn and something, cool to kind of, think about when you do it. So it's a year-long process to be a test pilot. That's actually pretty neat. Is the training really extensive?
There's a lot of academics that go into that. Because a test pilot is essentially the link between the engineers that know how to build things and the operators to know what those operators need. And so you need savviness in both the operations and the engineering. And they'll give you a manual of a plane and say, this is what you're flying the next day. Be ready. And sometimes it's a Goodyear blimp. Sometimes it's a float plane. Sometimes it's a World War II fighter. Sometimes it's something like an F-15 or F-16 or F-18. But it's such a rewarding year-long experience with your classmates that then forms people into being the Chuck Yeagers of today.
Oh, that's awesome. So I know your call sign is a dragon, right?
It is. I got that in 1998. You're probably going to ask me why.
Yeah, because I know there's a story. Yes.
There is a story. I tell people it has to do with the Zaragoza, Spain, and nuclear weapons. And that's all that I share. But in my community, they would get you in as a new lieutenant. And you would do enough stupid things in the first 6 months in the squadron, and they would have this big ceremony where they would come up with cool sounding names that had stories based on something stupid you did. And I had plenty of buffoonery, and they came up with dragon related to those things that I mentioned earlier.
Oh, that is awesome. So I always learned that there's always, again, because you do so many stupid things, that 9 times out of 10, your call sign is because of those stupid things. So it's interesting that basically you're confirming that.
It is, and it keeps you humble, but it also creates this opportunity for esprit de corps where you get together in the Heritage Room, also known as a bar in the squadron, and you tell stories about one another, and they only have to be 10% true, which means you can embellish a lot. And it kind of just makes it this fun experience for folks old and new alike.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome. So what I really want us to go start talking about is leadership. And leadership is something that, I grew up in the NCO Corps, in the Army, and also in policing now. I've been a sergeant for just about 2.5 years, 3 years, I think. But to me, the aspect of leadership is so important because I've had, and I'm sure you've seen, those toxic leaders who really dismantle an organization, a platoon, a squad, whatever, just because of how bad they are at this thing called leadership and not understanding what leadership really is, what it really means. And
yeah, I've seen so much of that. Frankly, I keep a leadership journal. And in that journal, I keep track of things that I've done, good or bad. People around me have done good or bad, up and down the chain. But you can learn a lot from those really bad, toxic leaders. And unfortunately, I've had my share too. And I think that if we're honest with ourselves, we need to be very careful about how we implement the things that we have seen in leadership to make sure that we implement the good and we stiff arm or make sure that we don't implement the bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times I've seen I've caught myself even because let's say somebody makes a mistake, and if you really think about it, yeah, it's more of an administrative mess up where you're just like, okay, it's not that big of a deal, but small things, small details turn into the big details, which I get all that, but at the same time, I've learned to stop myself from my leaders of the past, those toxic leaders, where they blow things way out of proportion to the point where your morale's gone, everything like, what the hell, I'm just messing up. I'm not doing anything right. So I want to really, to me, it's that leadership, which you talk about, which I've seen a lot about, is this idea of servant leadership. And servant leadership, and you go right in your book, you say, servant leadership is not about being soft or friendly or undisciplined. It's also not about forsaking high standards and allowing anything and everything. It's actually quite the opposite. Servant leadership is about embodying and expecting the highest standards because you genuinely want that. You genuinely want that, those high, for your men and women under your command to achieve those high standards. And to me, when I first got my interview to become a sergeant in policing, I was asked, what is your job? What is it that you do? And I said, mentorship for everybody, underneath. So just in terms of your take on the idea of servant leadership, I know you talk a lot about it in your book, but, let's get the general's, philosophy on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And going back to something you said, that there are plenty of times where people underneath you are going to do wrong or not do it exactly the way that you would like them to do it. But the leadership experts say that 90% of the time someone fails, it's because they haven't been given clear expectations or feedback. That means it's the boss's fault, not the subordinate's fault. And my vision or view of leadership is that a leader is there to help the people in their chain of command become the best possible version of themselves. And that means that you employ a range of leadership techniques. Sometimes they're fun, like inspiration and encouraging. Sometimes they're in the middle, like equipping, challenging, or convicting. And sometimes it means that you've got to employ the unfun leadership technique of correcting. But if you're doing it so that the people within your sphere of influence and realm of impact can become the best possible version of themselves because you genuinely care about them, then now you can raise them up and help them recover and keep them on the right track or get them on the right track and give them the feedback that they need. And that becomes massively helpful, not just for your organization in the here and now, but for whatever they go on to do. I call it my alumni network.
Okay.
Where if people have served under me, then wherever I go in the future or wherever they go, they're part of the alumni network that's going to carry a bit of me with them.
Yeah.
And I can do a lot of good for society and for the organization I'm in right now if I'm very intentional about developing the people who are around me to help them become the best possible version of themselves. And if you ask my kids, I've got 3 kids. I've got 2 girls in college and a son who's a senior in high school. And if you ask any of them, does dad love you? They'd say yes. Mm-hmm. If you ask them, do I have too high of standards or too low of standards? They'd probably say too high of standards. But it's because that I love them that I want them to be everything that they can be. And I employ that range of leadership techniques from inspiration to correction in order to help them become the best possible version of themselves. And in reality, it means that I flip the pyramid of leadership upside down. And instead of the leader being at the pinnacle, That pinnacle is at the bottom, serving and supporting those who are around them, who get the mission done, and who you are there to serve and support and mentor and develop into the best possible version of themselves.
Wow, that's actually very well said, sir. So it's one thing where, when people in leadership positions, when they embody that philosophy of what it means to be a leader versus those who took a test or whatever, made the promotion, and now, oh yeah, I'm a leader. Now I'm going to do what I've always wanted to do, which is whatever it might be. But you can totally tell the difference between the leader who embodies that leadership philosophy, whatever it might be, servant leadership, for example, and that other leader who is more this, what we'll call them, authoritarian version of leadership, because they want to impose their will upon their subordinates, right? And I see it as a huge difference because I've seen it for so many years over my military career, law enforcement career, even in business itself, where that sort of authoritarian type leader, when he or she is constantly that, it destroys the rest of the team. The rest of, is that accurate to say in your experience as well?
It does. It means that you are shutting off the human nature and the creativity of your team because the boss thinks that they know it all.
Yep.
And they're not going to listen to us. I say that leaders, real leaders, not managers, but leaders, should squint with their ears. That's a phrase that I didn't make up. It came from a former chief of staff of the Air Force. But I like the idea that when a leader walks into the room, they shouldn't necessarily walk in mouth first. Often they should walk in ears first to understand the situation and to solicit feedback about the right course of action or way forward before they make the ultimate decision. It doesn't mean that a leader doesn't ultimately bear the responsibility of a decision, but they shouldn't be the ones that are putting on their Superman cape or Superwoman cape and expecting that because they have a title that they have all the right answers. Yeah. I very rarely have all the right answers until I solicit feedback from my team of experts and then understand, maybe based on that feedback, what I should do. And the more leaders squint with their ears and stop walking into rooms mouth first, the better they will do fostering the creativity and unlocking talent of the team that surrounds them.
I love that because, there's one thing that I've been really studying, researching, looking into kind of more in depth is the idea of active listening. It's the whole thing. One of the things that I really like about that is, one question I ask during, whether I'm teaching a class or whether I'm talking to colleagues or even, when I'm teaching at 22 Mohawks, when we do our suicide awareness training, I always say, do we listen to understand or do we listen to reply? And, you hear the silence in the room. And the reason why I pose that question to them, because one, now they got to think about it. Am I using my emotions to reply, or am I listening on the other end to understand? Because in my world, in law enforcement, dealing with people, right? That's all we're in the dealing with people business, whether it's crimes and whatever else it might be. A lot of times I find, younger law enforcement officers, which no fault of their own, it's just the way they were trained, is they listen to reply. They say, oh, okay, so this happened, X, Y, Z. The equation means I got to do X, versus really understanding the why behind a certain action. Sure, there's, some of the really bad crimes, murder, rapes, whatever. Those are different. But if you get into like that gray area of community policing, where you're really like, okay, what's ticking in this neighborhood? And you do your neighborhood talks and listen to the people, and you go back to the PD, and because this is some things I've done in my unit. We have a unit that's called problem-oriented policing, where we look at a problem and now we try to come up with a solution, some sort of solution to help or do whatever that needs to be done. And that's where you go back to the police department and you solicit ideas from your subordinates, from your men and women, and you pick all their ideas. And like you said, these guys, these younger officers have some great ideas, and to not be afraid to take their ideas. Like you said, ultimately, yes, it's my decision, but you know what? Now they have ownership to that decision. or they feel like, oh shit, the Sarge listened to me. That's awesome. Like, yeah, this is my idea, where I'll tell them, all right, run with it, go ahead, do it. Like we had a pretty good crime, maybe over the summer, involved guns. And, it was like it was a mess, but I had a young officer who really took the reins on the whole investigation. And I told him, he came up to me and he said, hey, so Boston knows this about this guy, this. And I said, Mike, run with it, man. Go as far as you can. And he did a phenomenal job because I gave him that long leash, like, go, figure it out, take care of it. You have any questions, come ask me, So that's kind of the way I see it. So the way you're describing it, kind of similarly, where you're giving your men and women kind of rope to go and be the creative individuals that they are.
It's true. And there's not a lot that a leader really should do. I always say that the only few things they should do is that they should cast a bold vision. They should set very wide boundaries in achieving that vision. They should resource to that vision. They should break down barriers that are getting in the way of their team from achieving that vision. And then they should get out of the way.
Yeah.
And if you have a team that you trust, that you have hired the right people, or you have trained or developed them in the right way, then if you have an expert that comes to you and says, hey, boss, what should I do here? Your first response should be, well, what do you recommend? And almost all the time, 95+% of the time, with maybe a little bit of adjustment from a leader, you say, all right, that's what you recommended. Go do it.
Yeah.
And you have my full support.
Yeah.
And you recognize that the word starts getting out that you're that type of leader.
Yeah.
And now people are fighting to get into your organization, and their quality of life is skyrocketing. And by the way, if you look at your organization, not just say in law enforcement, the police force, but now you expand it into the community, and you're doing the same type of listening with them, then now instead of them being adversaries, they are now allies and partners with you as you're trying to achieve your mission on their behalf.
Yes, it's funny you say that, because actually I want to back up to a phrase that you said, because I've been saying this for years in law enforcement. Law enforcement has kind of taken this role in leadership for a while, that, supervisors, managers, right? Supervisors, managers. I personally never liked it. I'm like, man, I was like, supervisor, managers, that is so businesslike, like as if you're on a factory floor, you're making sure that the belts are running and your men and women are putting the nuts and the bolts together for whatever they're making, and you're just pushing products along. That's how I feel when I hear the terms, you supervisors and managers got it. Like, but no, we're more than that. Like, because we are not on a factory floor, or we're not in a business setting. We are in the business of people, right? And we are leaders, not supervisors, managers. Yeah, sure. Someone violates policy, we got to do what we got to do. Yeah, we'll talk to them and counsel them and all that good stuff. But in the end, we are leaders, not managers or supervisors. Is that something?
No, and there's something fundamentally different about those phrases. And I think that's a brilliant catch, that a supervisor or manager just oversees a bureaucracy and make sure that the machine is running as if the people in their organization are just robots, not human beings that have humanity.
Yeah.
Leaders bring about a future that wouldn't happen without them.
Yeah.
That means that you cast this bold vision, and then you march towards the vision together by communicating appropriately to your team. One of them just does the same thing over and over again, maybe fairly efficient.
Yeah.
The other one, being a leader, does something that moves forward instead of just refines what you're already doing.
Yeah, and that's the thing with me is like, yeah, I mean, you described it exactly. Supervisors and managers, what they actually do is keep the wheel running, keep that machine moving along. The world of law enforcement is not this machine; it's the pulse of a society, right? We have the pulse of the society. We are the men and women that are out there constantly dealing with societal issues, from everything from mental health to drug issues to addiction to, unemployment even, just because everything falls back on law enforcement for one reason or another. That's kind of the way people have been conditioned is, who do you call for help, when something bad is going on? Well, law enforcement, police, 911. We call 911 and the cavalry comes in. So we come in, we deal with whatever we're dealing with, and now we move on to the next mission, Well, to me, that's not a machine, right? That's you're dealing with people with emotions, with all kinds of different their personal lives, their perspectives, right? And as a leader, you have to take into account everything. And being a cop in America, in the United States, not only do we need to be experts in the laws and whatever tactics or whatever you want to call it, but also to me, I've always said we also have to take an anthropological approach because we deal with so many different societies, so many different cultures, that we tend to learn a lot about our communities just through the cultures that are within the communities.
I did a couple of ride-alongs with law enforcement, one in Los Angeles County, one up north in Maryland. And both times I've done that, I have been blown away at how human the job is.
Yeah.
How when you're dealing with humanity across the spectrum, race and wealth and gender and situations in their life, that it is a human condition or a human endeavor. And I was amazed at the law enforcement professionals I went out with. One was a friend of mine, one I was set up with, just as they dealt with the day-to-day situations that exist in a community with humanity.
Yeah.
And it is a people-focused environment and requires the utmost of ability to lead and connect with people of all sorts. And I was amazed by walking away from both of those situations.
And, well, that's what I always say. I always remind my officers, every roll call, we do some sort of roll call training. I make sure I hit, again, commander's intent and mission of the day and stuff like that. I kind of make sure that we, again, like you said, we give them the left and right limits and go forth and conquer kind of thing, but we talk to them and, I always tell them that I always remind them that, listen, in the end, we're dealing with people, right? We're dealing with people. We're not dealing with, Joe Schmo that we don't know anything about. We learn about these people, and how do we best learn? Go out in the community and talk to people, right? I mean, there are some officers, unfortunately, they lack good communication skills, and that's where issues start to happen. And those are the ones I try as much as I can to push them. It's one of those things like you described it, corrective versus mentorship and stuff like that. So there's some that I take a little bit harder stance in correcting certain aspects of the way they do, but in the end, I still have them go with their, if they give me an idea, I will listen to it, but I will also guide them in a way where it's like, okay, I like it, but let's work on it. Let's think about, first, second, third order effects. And they'll think about it and they'll come back and they'll give me an even better idea. And I said, there it is. That's exactly what needs to happen. And go ahead, go do that, and that to me right there is part of that servant leadership and being part of the community to really understand what's going on around you.
And two thoughts on that. And by the way, brilliant ideas. Thank you for sharing that. And one of those ideas is that the community is not the adversary of law enforcement.
No.
They're the customer or the partner in achieving public safety goals. Yeah. And I think that regardless of what you do, law enforcement, military, something else, that if you look at the people around you as potential partners or allies or collaborators instead of adversaries or competitors, then you tend to find opportunities for mutual benefit or shared solutions. And then the other idea is that we need as leaders to be giving regular feedback like the type you just described. Just think about if I was parenting my 3 kids and I saved up all of my critiques about them for annual feedback with my kids. Yeah. That would be abusive or neglectful, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So instead of doing that, I, as a parent, will see something and then correct it on the spot or praise it on the spot, instead of bottling it up for some midterm or end of year feedback. And I think the more that we do that, the better we're able to refine on a regular basis as a leader and develop and mentor the people and what they're doing all around us.
Yeah. I mean, a good example, like I don't like those, you wait 3 months for your annual review or whatever it is. Like me, I've always been the type, even as a kid, no matter what, I need immediate feedback so that way I can fix or do better in whatever I'm doing, whatever it might be, whether it's sports, school, you name it. I've always been the type of like, all right, tell me how I did right now. If I messed up, tell me. And to this day, I'm still that same way. And I find that with the officers on the road, they really want to do a great job. I have not met one cop out there that's like, oh, I want to suck today. It doesn't exist. And they really want to try. And just by that alone, that motivates me to help them, try, because I was that cop. We all started brand new, right? Whether you were a lieutenant, whether I was a private in the military, like we all started as this unsure. Even to this day, I tell them, listen, I still learn. Like I'm not an expert in anything. I'm just here. I learn every day and I perfect the craft that is law enforcement. I try to perfect that craft. In the end, it's a craft, just like being a fighter pilot. It's a craft. It's something that you take seriously and you build it, refine it, and make it better. And you move along your entire career just making it better, making yourself better as a result. So with my officers, I'll give you an example. We had a shooting 3 weeks ago, and we have body cams. And what I like doing on really major critical incidents, I like doing a very in-depth AAR with my officers. That is something that unfortunately in law enforcement, unless like I'm on a SWAT team, like SWAT, we do ARs like crazy. But in the we'll call conventional law enforcement on the patrol side, they don't do enough ARs. And that's where a lot of mistakes happen as a result from my assessment and from what I've seen. So I like doing a very in-depth AR. So I did my AR with my guys, talked about everything, because I reviewed the camera footage. I just wanted to see what everyone was doing because I was incident command, so I couldn't really observe everybody because I had the overall 30,000 foot view to, set up the perimeter, get the canines. If we need air wing, bring air wing. So I was busy on that level. So when I broke it down to each individual patrol, you could tell they want to know, like, hey, how did I do? Did I do this right? Should I have done this? And I even put it on myself. I said, I should have done this better. So I usually start the conversation off with the mistakes I made. I say, hey, I know I messed up on this. Like next time we're going to set up, I'm going to make sure that the perimeter is set up sooner rather than later. I know I messed this up. So that way they already know, they're not as guarded. Like, oh crap, I'm going to get called out. No, I call myself out first because that's, to me, that is something I learned from my old battalion commander in Iraq, Colonel McElroy, which I talk to this day. He's a very, very close friend. And, that's something he's always done, and that's something I took from him. Like, oh, that's an awesome idea. Like, yeah, own up to your own mistakes. That way your men and women under your command can see that you're also flawed. You're human. We all make mistakes no matter what. So I see this one officer, the officer that responded there, and he walks in and he didn't even have his gun out, nothing. I'm like, oh man, that is bad because, he was the first one there and we didn't have any information. All we know is shots were fired. We have someone who's wounded and the suspect's at large. So just those three things were like, oh crap, this guy could be around. So he wasn't working, but I texted him on the phone. I said, hey, dude, are you around? Can I talk to you? And he's like, yeah. He gives me a call and I give him my feedback. And man, he was so grateful about it. And first thing I tell him, I'm like, listen, I'm not bashing. I'm not doing anything like that. I really care about guys and gals doing right and being safe doing it. So I gave him my spiel and told him, listen, how did you know that the suspect was really gone? A lot of the times eyewitnesses could be wrong. The guy could be hiding in the basement for all we know. So he really took all that to heart and was like, man, yeah, you know what? I knew it. Like I felt that I didn't do something right, and thank you for bringing it up, and blah, 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 blah. So to me, that is what a leader should be doing versus.
I think you're spot on. No, I think that's great. And way back in the beginning of this conversation, we talked about how 90% of the time when someone fails, it's because they weren't given either good, clear expectations or regular feedback. And one of the things that I think law enforcement and the military does pretty well that others in society could tag onto is that we do have guard mounts at the beginning of the shift.
Yeah.
Or a brief or a mass brief before I go out to fly.
Yeah.
And then maybe we have a guard mount at the end or a huddle or a hot wash or an after action or a debrief. Something that people are surprised sometimes to hear is that the last time an American military member was killed from a manned adversary from the air was April of 1953. That is a long period of air dominance. And it's not necessarily because we have the best pilots or the best machines. It is because every time I go out to fly in training, we have a brief up front that shares the details of what we're going to do and what are our objectives.
Yeah.
And then we get done with that training sortie, we go back and sometimes spend as long as we flew, or 2 times or 3 times or 4 times as long, going back over what were our objectives, what did we say we were going to do, and when we didn't hit the mark, what is the root cause? By the way, I love the idea that the leader of that debrief should be the one that's most harsh on themselves than they are anybody else.
Yeah.
And you should be humble and you should be honest about your own shortcomings in the root cause problems of executing the mission.
Yeah.
But sometimes you find out in the debrief, it was an error in the plan, or an error in the brief, or an execution error.
Yeah.
And I think that we, law enforcement, military, or others, should be more diligent about setting expectations and having a guard mount up front, and then doing regular hot washes or after action or debriefs, so that we can be in this mindset of continuous learning, so that we can improve as a mission and an organization and as individuals.
Well, and that's the thing, like in the military, law enforcement, first responders, firefighters, it's a team sport, right? That's just the way it is. It's a team sport, and we have to work as a team, from leaders on down to, the youngest officer or firefighter, whatever it might be. We're all part of that same team. And I actually want to ask you about this one thing I read that I actually highlighted it, is in the hot washes, in the ARs, in everything, you ask 3 questions. And those 3 questions that you ask is, what am I doing wrong? What are we doing wrong? And what can I do to help? Can you go into that a little bit more on how, those 3 questions that you ask yourself and the organization, how you've applied it?
I mean, absolutely. And it's actually more than just when I do hot washes or debriefs. As a leader, as I'm wandering around the organization, and I get out of the office as absolutely much as I can, because that's where the action is outside of my office, outside of the ivory tower, and I should get to where the people are and the mission is getting accomplished. But as you just strike up a conversation with somebody who's on the factory floor or in the maintenance bay or out on the flight line or at a guard mount, and you typically get to know them a little bit. But if you ask those types of questions, and then they believe that you're actually listening, considering, and acting upon what they deliver, then now it creates this reinforcing feedback. And those questions are some version of, what am I doing wrong? What are we doing wrong? What can I do to help? And almost every time I would go out, I would ask those. And at first, people are probably a little bit guarded, and they're like, oh, I don't know if the boss either really wants to know, or I should really share this with that individual. But then once somebody shares something with me, and I clearly am listening, and I consider it, and then I act upon it, whether it's the way that they want me to act on it or not, but I act on something that I have heard from them. They tell their buds and they tell their coworkers. And now the next time I ask those questions, people are more forthcoming, and I get better ideas and better feedback, and I know what's going on in my area of responsibility better. And it creates this virtuous cycle and reinforcement loop of people that now believe that the boss is using that construct that I use a lot in the book, listening, considering, and acting on the things that I hear.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like I said, that's why, I'm the first one to say, hey, I know I made this mistake. That's why I say it right away, just to put their guard down, because I don't want to be that leader, because I have seen those leaders. I've been in those conversations where the leader is like, well, you messed this up, and blah, 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 blah. In the back of all our minds, we're like, yeah, but dude, you didn't even tell me to do, or you didn't even want, like, you never even, you weren't clear on your intention or your mission or what you wanted us to do. But to me, it's like the finger pointing, like, oh, it's your fault. No, like, to me, what did I do? First, my biggest thing is, all right, did I miscommunicate? I always ask that question. Like, if somebody doesn't do something a certain way, the first thing I go to is, man, did I not tell him exactly, or was I not clear? So, I go through this whole process in my head. I'm like, God damn, I don't think I told them what maybe I wasn't as clear. So that's when, I'll bring them into my office, and, I'll sit them down and say, hey, I'm wondering, was I not clear? Like, and then we'll process elimination. And to me, I don't yell. this whole thing of yelling and screaming and pounding your chest, it doesn't get you anywhere. And unfortunately, we still have leaders to this day, whether it's law enforcement, military, that love hearing their voice outside the office. They'll scream and yell, and you're like, to me, it's like it's unbecoming of a leader. Like, no, like you're not talking to a bunch of preschoolers. You're not talking to your kid. Who's 8 years old and is just being a pain in the butt, right? You're talking to professionals, right? Whether they did something wrong or whatever. No, have a conversation, right? A lot of times I find out later on that through conversation, there might be something personal going on in their lives that is getting in the way of them performing. And now I got to take that into consideration, where I'm like, oh, crap. Like, oh, man, I didn't know your grandfather passed away. I didn't know, you have this personal issue going on. And, that whole idea of, leaders' doors always open, I take that to heart. Like, no, like if you have an issue, 110% come to me. Because to me, as a leader, as long as I know that maybe something's going on with you, then it'd be more understanding as to why you missed something. You missed a small detail, or you forgot to file this piece of paperwork, because you have a lot of things going on in your own mind. And that to me is like part of the idea of being a leader in an organization that deals with people.
It does. And it goes back to the idea that your people are not robots or algorithms.
Yeah.
They're human beings. And that means they carry some baggage. You and I carry our own baggage.
Yeah.
And if somebody messes up, as the example that you just described, and then as we're digging deeper, I find out that their wife has been in the hospital for the last week. Well, bad on me for not knowing that ahead of time and creating a culture where they would have shared that ahead of time.
Yeah.
And then I love the idea that you ask the question, hey, was I not clear?
Yeah.
Because say in that fighter pilot debrief where we were going to a target and we needed to break left at a certain point and I briefed it clearly. And then on the radio, instead of saying break left, I break right. One person breaks right, the rest follow the plan and break left. And I'm like, dude, you broke right. You're an idiot. What are you doing? Well, that doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
Maybe I should start with asking, hey, you broke right here. What were you thinking?
Yeah.
Like, well, you actually said break right. And I said, well, I said in the plan, break left, but then I rolled the tapes, the body cam, and found out that I said break right, and now it's my fault, right? So instead of just jumping on, you did something wrong because you're ignorant or stupid, and I ask those types of questions of, hey, was I not clear? What were you thinking in this moment? Then now you actually get better to the root cause of the problem than just the superficial, well, you did something wrong, so you must be dumb.
That's funny you say that, because actually last week, I think was it last week? Yeah, last week I dealt with something. So sometimes I sit in the office. I'm the shift commander, so I'm in charge of the entire shift. And I'm sitting there. I'll go in and check out the dispatchers, check on them. I'll do my walks and talks and laugh and joke and whatever. And remember, there was a call, and one of the officers did not acknowledge or did not. There's something happened, and I'm like, hey, who was that? And the dispatcher says, oh, it's so and so. I'm like, did they not respond? Like, because it was like a critical type incident where you got to make sure communication is going back and forth. I'm like, what the heck? And the dispatcher was like, well, before I say anything, let me roll the tapes back. I'm like, yeah, roll the tapes back before I make phone calls. Like, let's check. And sure enough, yeah, no, the officer did everything right. He responded, cleared, did everything. And I'm like, okay, I'm good. And I never brought it up to the officer, because to me, all done, all good. Everything is fine, because we rolled the tape back and we saw it, and I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So it did happen. Could be just radios are acting funky. I mean, it happens, right? So yeah, it's funny the way you said that about breaking left, because that memory just triggered right to that, where I'm like, yeah, actually, I do remember exactly, and I didn't say anything to the officer, because in reality, the officer didn't do anything wrong.
And if we have truth sources like tape, body cams, or fighter pilot HUD footage, then it makes those types of after actions so much richer, because you know what actually happened. And now, instead of spending the time trying to piece together what happened, you can piece together the root cause of where things went wrong, if they did.
Yeah. So in talking about the human aspects, human characteristics of dealing with just people, there's on Havoc Journal, they took an excerpt of your book and how you dealt with Iraqis when you were overseas, and how you spoke to them, right? And in these meetings, can you go over into, how and why you decided to take the approach you did, where this mutual respect of our own humanity, can you go into that a little bit?
I would be happy to, and thanks for asking. And I do appreciate that Havoc Journal published that excerpt from Boom, my book. But when I was the senior defense official over there for 14 months, deployed from May of 2020 to July of 2021, one of my big roles as a senior military representative from the United States to the country of Iraq was dealing with senior Iraqis. And sometimes that meant the prime minister, sometimes the national security advisor, sometimes the minister of defense. But weekly, I would have meetings with the chief of defense, like our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His name was General Abdul Amir Urala. And he had just taken that position from the ground force commander or the commander of the army when I showed up over there. And he had this reputation of being the super gruff guy, Iranian aligned, a harsh, toxic type of leader. And it was a little intimidating to think about, now I'm going to end up having weekly meetings with this guy. What are we going to do that's productive and professional? And I sat down with my team. And by the way, huge praise to Adnan, my cultural advisor, as we did a little bit of this planning and briefing to how we were going to handle Urala, was that we came up with the conclusion that we needed to do two things. That number one, we needed to emphasize shared humanity, more on that in a bit. And then two, we needed to figure out opportunities for mutual benefit. So let me break each of those down, and starting with shared humanity. Anyone that you meet, even Iranian-aligned Abdul Amir Urala, is going to have things that overlap with you because you're both human beings. And sometimes that's family, sometimes that's desires, dreams, goals, fears, anxieties. And you find ways based on just being human beings to try to connect with them. It takes a little bit of emotional intelligence to do that. Yeah. But one of the things specifically we had as an advantage is that one of my key subordinates had served alongside of Urala in the fight against ISIS as an American military advisor. And so he shared some stories about Urala. They had this relationship that, though it was superficial, still existed. And we would go into those meetings, and before we jumped into the business of the day, we would talk a little bit about the fight against ISIS, or how's your family doing, or it's Ramadan. I've been fasting alongside of you for this chunk of time, and I really am enjoying just getting to know a little bit about your culture, and start talking to him as a human being, not as an adversary or a competitor or an enemy. And that's the shared humanity. And by the way, if it works with someone like Urala, it should work anywhere with whoever we come across. And then the other part is mutual benefit. And I say you need strategic savvy to understand what are his objectives, his circle of his objectives, both as a person and as a guy who's the chief of defense for Iraq. And then what are mine or my countries? And then there will be overlap, even if someone is completely different than you. And so now, instead of exploring or lamenting the areas where we don't overlap and are different, let's start cultivating the fertile ground of overlap, of what are my objectives that overlap with his objectives, and how we can move forward in that area without really worrying about those things where we don't overlap. And by the way, as you work more and more to find opportunities for overlap, then you find that you can pull his circle slightly closer to yours. And with emotional intelligence or through shared humanity, you can pull that circle a little closer to yours, which means there's more opportunity to overlap. And I think if we look at people less as competitors or adversaries or enemies, and more as human beings that have opportunities for mutual benefit, then now we can have productive professional relations with people around us, like I did weekly with General Abdul Amir Urala.
That it's funny, that shared humanity, the way you did it with the Iraqis, the way you did it with the general, the way you did it, it does require a lot of strategy, right? And it's a lot of conversation. So in 2005, when I was in Iraq, I speak Arabic, fluent Arabic. So, talk about having, that's when I learned as a young 20-year-old how important I was essentially to the, again, we're naive. We're 20 years old. All I want to do is blow shit up and go do whatever. But, the battalion commander took me on when he found out I speak fluent Arabic, because to him, he was like, oh, I have a U.S. soldier who speaks Arabic and understands the mission. So it's like, it was like that trifecta for him. And he pulled me right out of my unit. And now I got attached to him. And that's one thing that I've always told anyone that came out with me to when we go converse with the Iraqi leadership, whether it's the Mukhtars or the mayors, the governors, whatever. I always tell them, listen, the first hour, 2 hours, we're not going to even talk business. We're going to talk about family. We're going to talk about religion. We're going to have tea. We're going to talk about everything else before business, because that's just the way the culture is. Even to this day, even my family, when I go see them, we are going to talk about everything before we talk about anything else, So, and that's just the way it is in that culture, because one, they're really trying to get to know you as a person. They want that's their way of them sizing you up, basically. And that's what I explained to any unit that I worked with, whether it was Marine Human Intel, Special Forces, you name it. I was like, we're going to go. Yeah. Taking the lead obviously on the conversation, but it's going to be a while. So strap in, it's going to be a while.
Yep.
And
even in the United States, though, we're a busy culture. We're overhurried and overworked.
Yeah.
But I shouldn't pick up the phone as a boss and start talking to someone and first jump into business without a little bit of the, hey, how's your day going? It was Thanksgiving last week. Did you get together with your family?
Yeah.
Because if I don't do that, then I'm just treating them like a robot or an algorithm. And I think in cultures like in the Arab cultures or in the Middle East, that maybe you need to do that a little bit more intentionally and more robustly.
Yeah.
But if you don't do a little bit of that in the United States too, then people are going to just sense that you're treating them like another thing than a human being.
Yeah. And that's the thing there. I remember, so we were sitting with the Iraqis, and it was the Mukhtars and all of them of a local village near my fob. And we were just talking, and, they get into religion, because I'm Shia Muslim, and, they're Sunni Muslim. And even then we had the shared, shared, like you said, the shared influence or the shared humanity, right? Where we were literally going back and forth with different verses from the Quran and, interpretations and stuff like that. I mean, it was a great conversation. I was actually enjoying it. And eventually I forgot why we were there. I'm like, wait, okay, hey guys, why are we here again? Because you get so immersed in the conversation. And it's funny where they might think that they're yelling at me or I'm yelling at them. I mean, no, we're just talking, guys. We're not yelling. This isn't going any we're just talking, because we're a very animated. We're almost like Italians, very animated with our hands and the way we talk and everything. So and though that connection to humanity really gave us some good actionable intelligence eventually, right? Really gave us things that we can work with, because in my strategic mind, and again, like me being young, like I reflect on it now that I'm, mid 40s, I reflect on it now that I really had no idea the impact I had until I reflect on it now, where I'm like, yeah, I was just this young 20-year-old, 21. I mean, I turned 21 at war, it's like, I wasn't even, that's who I was, and not realizing the impact that I had in my AO, area of operation, that everyone knew who I was. The Iraqis, they knew I was, hey, Ayman's here, because I always went with my first name. I never gave my last name. I always said, yeah, just call me Ayman. Again, that humanity, right? My name is Ayman. That's all they knew me as, is just Ayman. Not a U.S. soldier, not this, not that. No, this is Ayman. And he'll get you what you need, whether it's chlorine tabs or whatever it is. And that shared humanity where, I'm taking care of them, they're taking care of me, and that mutual respect for one another really changed that dynamic of the whole AO, because I had intel. I remember, Special Forces unit, I forget exactly who, they needed a debrief of the area. So the battalion commander gave me a call, on our little Motorola radios, and said, hey, can you come up to the talk? And I go up, see him. He's like, hey, meet, I forget all their names and everything, but he's like, yeah, can you go over kind of the AO? So we had the map laid out of the entire AO of our area, where our FOB is. And I literally went into each village, what ticks in each village, who the leaders are, friendly to U.S. forces, not friendly to U.S. forces, blah, 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 blah. And I remember finally the SF team sergeant took his hat off, scratched his head. He's like, well, I'm going to throw out everything the S2 gave me, because you gave me so much more than I thought I could get. I'm like, hey, I mean, but that's what I said. I said, yeah, just go out, just talk. It's all about talking to the people and knowing.
And they're human beings. Yeah. And knowing the language, And knowing the culture is important because it allows you to connect more easily. And I don't speak Arabic, though I had Adnan and he took great care of me as my cultural advisor. But one of the things that I did, and I mentioned it briefly earlier, that set the right stage with Ural and others was that I showed up and it was the beginning of Ramadan.
Yeah.
And I went through the entire period of Ramadan fasting as if I were a Muslim. I'm not, but it doesn't matter. I was surrounded by people that this was a major part of their cultural experience.
Yeah.
And if I could share in that and maybe talk to them a bit about my experiences and what they think about the experience of Ramadan throughout their lives, then now it's a way to connect. And I didn't do it because I was trying to angle in to find out the best gouge from them. I was doing it because they're a human being. I'm in their neighborhood. How about if I experience some things that they have experienced the entirety of their lives? And, I knew that we had good meetings when Ural and I would go through an hour or so of chatting, and we would start with some of the personal stuff, and then we would get into business. And then he would say sometimes at the end of the meetings, hey, all of these other strap hangers, the people that were around, you can just stay here. I'm going to take John Dragon Teichert into my office with his cultural advisor, and it's just going to be the three of us, and we're just going to chat. And I love the bigger meetings that were a little bit more formal, but I really loved going into his office and just chatting, especially more personally about family or about religion or about his experiences. And you do it right when they embrace you as a human being, not just as somebody that they've got to do business with.
So that's it. So now moving forward, going forward, like in law enforcement, when this unit, so the unit problem-oriented policing, when it was first started by my chief, again, he gave us the commander's intent. It was three of us. At the time, I was a patrol officer. So it was a sergeant and two patrol officers. All three of us are combat veterans, right? The sergeant at the time, who's now the deputy chief, the sergeant at the time, he was an Afghan vet. I'm an Iraq vet. And my partner was a Gulf War vet. So you had three combat vets and three philosophies, three different ways of doing things and all that. But, I remember we met, so we had a very broad mission, right? We're like, okay, so we got to solve problems. Okay, let's figure this out, So finally we sat around and we're like, okay, how are we going to tackle these? And kind of collectively, we're like, winning hearts and minds. So, kind of that Green Beret type philosophy of going in to a neighborhood, employing the people of that neighborhood to give us either actionable intel or even coming in to help them clean up the street, or, because we did a lot of good in terms of connecting with people on a human level. That's why I always go, even to this day, I'm back on uniform patrol because I'm a sergeant, but I always go and say, I don't say, hey, my name is Sergeant Kafel, I'm with this police. No, my name is Ayman. How you doing? What's going on? Blah, blah, blah. These are my guys. And just, I don't talk to people as if I'm this authority figure. They already know. Yeah, I'm a cop. I got the badge, all that. But you know what? I've told people, ignore the badge, ignore all this fancy gear I got on. Just level with me, man to man, or, whatever. Just level with me and let's talk about it. And you see how a guarded person kind of starts coming back down a little, as you're having these conversations. And like you said, when you go get into human level, I remember I took the city councilor, city councilor did a ride along with me. And this was back when I was in that unit. And we went into a rougher part of the city and just driving around, and this woman comes up to me. She knows my car. I had this, sick Dodge Charger, all this Hemi engine and everything. Everyone knew my car, right? They knew I was in the neighborhood when they saw that car. But she came up to me. He's like, hey, officer, he's like, that guy you've been looking for, he's in that house right now. And he was wanted for significant crimes and stuff like that. And the city council was, I coordinated this whole takedown. We got a bunch of officers surrounded and ended up getting them. And this city council was just blown away. He said, how did you do that? I'm like, this is just, talking to people. I mean, that's how you recruit people, through helping them, and they'll feed you information here and there, and to me, it's not that difficult to really bring it down to human level. So I took everything that I learned overseas and brought it here, because that's the way I saw it, as okay, this is my area of operations, and now this is what I got to do and what I got to deal with.
Oh, and I think it applies in law enforcement and it applies in the military, but it applies everywhere.
Yeah.
That I live in Washington, D.C. Imagine if folks on both sides of the aisle in the Capitol would take this approach with one another, because they're not enemies with one another.
No.
They both swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah.
And there are opportunities to explore shared humanity and mutual benefit. And if they focused on that instead of just yelling to the cameras and getting the social media hits, then our country would be able to move forward in solving problems instead of the dysfunction that we see right now. And it applies at the local level and the state level and the federal level. And I think that some of the things we talked about just in the last hour or so about leadership and about humanity can be applicable anywhere to any type of leader or any type of person that actually wants to solve real problems.
Yeah, and it's so true. I mean, we as leaders look at the political arena, and I shake my head all the time. I'm like, really? I was like, this is what this is what we've come to. Whether it's name calling or whatever it is. I'm like, where did the time go of us just sitting down and just talking? Like, why did we move away from that? And I always tell people, I'm like, listen, I don't have to agree with everything that you say, but guess what? We're still friends. We're still brothers. Like, I've got very close friends where I'm like, oh, hell no, I don't think that's right thing to do or whatever. But you know what? Yeah, I don't cut them off, or I don't start calling them names just because, they have a certain idea on something. And it's like, that shared. And I think that's the biggest take I took out of your book. If I was to sum up your book, it's more or less, as a leader, shared humanity is where it's at with your people. I mean, if I was to sum up your book, is basically that's kind of where you took it to.
I appreciate that. I think that's a great summary. And I think that as you had that experience around your fob, or I had my experience in Baghdad, that we saw it in action with people that are so different than us in a lot of different ways, but yet there's still shared humanity and opportunities for mutual benefit. And I think if we look at life or the people that we come across through that lens, then I think that we can find a lot more harmony and a lot more opportunities for collaboration and a lot more opportunities to solve problems that really exist in our communities or in our society.
Yeah, absolutely. And General, I know we've gone a little over an hour, but you're a busy guy. So I'd like to pose this question to you, to our listeners, and kind of get your answers on it. And if there was something, usually we ask this question all the time of our guests, and if there's something you want leaders or anybody to take from this conversation, from your book, if there's a piece of advice that, a patrol officer, let's say working a midnight shift, was listening to this podcast, and if there's something that you want to give them, or ideas of leadership and shared humanity, if there's any sort of piece of advice you want to give them, what would that be?
We covered so much ground, and let me start by saying I so appreciate the heroes that listen to your podcast, and first responders or military. And I would always start every single staff meeting. I would have staff meetings weekly or so. I'd keep them as short as possible with my goals for the week. And those goals changed, or at least 2 through X changed. But number 1 was always demonstrate genuine care and concern for the members of my team. And I would say that to model to the other subordinate leaders that were in the room, that is the type of hierarchy that I'm talking about, flipping the triangle upside down, and the leader being at the bottom there to serve and support others to help them become the best possible version of themselves. And if we have leaders in every level in our society that genuinely care about people and care about helping them to become the best possible version of themselves and achieving the mission along the way, then we're going to have a society that is so much better. And developing leaders that learn how to be leaders by watching role models who do that exact thing. And in doing so, I think that we can improve society immensely. But it starts with genuine care and concern for the people and the mission in order to best allow them to develop into the best possible version of themselves.
Wow, that's a lot there for someone. Yeah, I mean, that's a great way of summing up literally this entire episode in just a short soundbite, if you want to call it. And if General, just for 1 second, let me do an outro, and we'll talk offline in a second. So, everybody, General, thank you for coming on. This has been an amazing conversation. I truly do genuinely appreciate all that you've done in your time, and still to this day, in bringing out and really talking about that shared humanity as leaders, about really humanizing leadership, humanizing your men and women under your command or under your supervision. And so thank you so much for coming on. And everybody, thank you for coming on and listening and watching. This will be on YouTube. All your listening needs, please share, like, comment on the episode, on all the other episodes that we push out. And thank you to our sponsor supporters, Havoc Journal, Second Mission Foundation, 22 Mohawks, this beautiful skiff that we at the headquarters that is here in Massachusetts, as well as AAA Police Supply. Don't forget to head over there and use Sapient 2025 for 10% off your entire order. And as usual, everybody, please stay safe and stay sapient.